Hi there, my name is Scott McDonald, and in today's video I'm going to attempt a 1-hour challenge in which I try to learn a double wall transfer on my non-dominant twisting side in 60 minutes or less. You'll have to stay tuned till the end to see whether or not I succeed, but either way, I hope you enjoy watching the process. In order to keep things safe, I decided to start with a pretty thorough calf and ankle warm-up. When I do double transfers to the left, which is my dominant side, I take a ton of impact with my calves and Achilles and wind up super sore. And considering I'm twisting to the right on this video, and my body is way less conditioned for that, I wanted to make sure my lower legs were ready for battle before I began training. I also sometimes find that the soles of my feet take a beating from double transfers, so to stay safe, I decided to use my custom molded FP insoles. I used these exact insoles in every single show I ever performed with Cirque du Soleil. They're absolutely fantastic at reducing impact, so I'll leave a link in the description below for anyone who's interested in learning more. Now that my feet felt protected and my legs were ready to go, I headed over to the tramp wall. I did a little bit of measuring, and the gap between these walls is exactly 10.5 feet, which means that in a double transfer, I'm going to have to get from the trampoline to the wall, travel a total of 21 feet back and forth in midair, then finally push off and return to my back. I figured that since a double transfer is essentially 2 cradle transfers back to back before literally going to my back, it would make sense to start with a single cradle transfer that twisted to my right. Next, I bounced on my feet and simulated the feeling of jumping to and from the wall while turning to the right. I focused on being in a stance with my left foot on top, which would open my hips to the right and make it easier to twist. Then I took the drill one step further by jumping back to the first wall, which felt like a massive breakthrough. The thing is, I went into this challenge completely expecting to fail. I find double transfers on my left so physically demanding that I can barely walk for 2 or 3 days after a training session, so the idea of doing this on my right, which feels completely unnatural and terrifying by comparison, seemed pretty unlikely, I'll put it that way. With that in mind, doing this drill meant that I had already simulated the hardest part of the trick. All I needed to do to turn this into a real double transfer was get a good takeoff from the first wall and then keep everything the same. So even though I had previously had my doubts, I now felt confident that I could succeed not only within the hour, but within the next few minutes. Now that I had changed my mindset, I decided it was time to begin working on the trick itself. I began by doing an extra aggressive single transfer in which I looked over my right shoulder to prepare for my second jump. It felt okay, but it also felt like my feet were glued to the second wall, so on my next attempt I forced myself to disconnect and jump away, even though I knew there was absolutely no way I was going to make it back to the first wall. This still felt like a huge step in the right direction, so I gave it more power and conviction, and a couple tries later I came extremely close to touching the very bottom of the first wall. Now, generally speaking, a double transfer requires full commitment to both jumps. And while I was certainly trying to jump, I was honestly much more fixated on the intricacies of technique and also just how weird it felt to twist to the right. Upon realizing that, I decided it was time to stop rationalizing and just add more brute force, and as simple as it sounds, that did the trick. I wasn't going to count this as a technical success, since I didn't manage to keep running out of it, but I had gotten back to the first wall after just 7 minutes, so I decided to take a quick water break and gracefully dismounted the trampoline. When I resumed training, I decided to reapproach the double transfer with more confidence and conviction. It's much easier to really go for something when you already know you can do it, so now that the mental hard part was over, I just tried to blast myself across the walls as hard as possible without breaking them. I was consistently returning to the first wall, but I had no momentum or power left, and I was making contact significantly lower than I dismounted. See, my assessment of quality for a double transfer is the height with which you return to the first wall. If you're making contact at the same height or higher than where you left it, it's good, but as you can see, my attempts were re-anchoring significantly lower. In order to see if there were any fundamental differences in technique that I was missing, I tried a double transfer to the left, and that theoretically should have been much easier and better, but to my surprise, I found that my dominant side felt very weak compared to the attempts on my right. When going to the left, I would consistently hit the second wall, then subconsciously throw downwards instead of trying to gain height with my arms. I suspect this happened because I have more preconceived notions about how my body works when twisting to the left, but ironically, just rudimentarily trying to get the job done on my right felt way better. Having done that, I went back to doing them on the right side, but this time I emphasized trying to gain height by actively lifting my arms and jumping upwards off the second wall, and this really paid off. After 23 minutes, my bottom foot re-anchored slightly higher than where it took off from, which meant that I was able to retain most of my power and keep running pretty cleanly. I considered this a successful completion of the challenge, but since I still had over half an hour left, I decided to add another layer of difficulty and try switching directions in the middle of a double transfer. I started by doing a cradle transfer to the right and then returning to the left, imagining how it would feel to do that without the bounce in between. I did it in this direction first because I figured getting a good takeoff with the right and then coming back on my weaker, albeit dominant side, might be easier than starting with a weak takeoff. Sure enough, on my very first attempt, I did manage to return and make contact with the wall, but also the frame and the other frame, so I wasn't exactly going to count that. My second attempt went slightly better, but it was still far from controlled. I took a minute to rewatch the footage and realized I was still actively throwing my right arm downward into the return on my left, plus I was also taking off from a left foot on top awkward cross stance. I tried again while thinking about fixing both of those things, and while I didn't actually fix either thing even slightly, apparently just thinking upward thoughts somehow did the trick, and I wound up getting a couple pretty good right-left double transfers. Having successfully done right-left, I decided to try going left-right, and that almost worked on the first try. I managed to make it back, but I had lost all of my power, so I gave it one more attempt with full commitment, and wound up doing one of my absolute best double transfers of the day, if not all time. Considering it had now been about 45 minutes since I started the challenge, I decided to end on a high note and call it a day. So there you have it. I was very pleasantly surprised to find out that double transfers are actually quite a lot easier for me in any configuration except my dominant twisting side. And if you happen to be good at double transfers and you have any tips for me based on what you can see in this, please let me know. I'm very curious to go to a trampoline park and see how it feels on a bit of a narrower setup. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap things up. So as always, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, good luck and happy training.